everybody. Welcome YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Tonight we are still at my mom's office slash laundry room. Actually, it was really a nice office, but then they put her laundry in here. So, because they wanted it to be on the first floor. Um, so, I still am having some gunk and stuff, so I apologize. I'm going to try and do my best with the reading tonight. Got my hot tea here going, so hopefully it will make it through. So we still have our 25% off sales in both stores, and we are in Whatnot and on Whatnot every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 o'clock from 6 to 10 on Whatnot. It's a live auctioning platform. If you don't know what that is, it's an app that you can put on your phone, and you just go right into it, and it's easy to sign up for. And you can just start right in. And we are on there as Rarity Estate Finds because I could not get my regular business name on there. It was too big, as it usually is, too big for everything. So go ahead and do that if you would like to do auctions. We are going through a bunch of Lincoln books right now in there, and so it's really fun. There's a bunch of Lincoln books, so no shortage there. And people have bought some, but there's still a lot of really good ones in there. So I'm going to post our eBay stores on here, and then we'll get started with the reading. Hang on just a minute here. And then I'll post the whatnot. I wish I could talk. The whatnot address for you as well. Okay, there you go. There's those two addresses, and then I'll get the whatnot one on here as well. And all you need to do is just click it. That should let you sign up. And then should be able to get on there and be able to buy things and bid on things and that type of thing. So the chat is open, guys, if you want to talk to me about anything. And you guys on Instagram, I appreciate you guys, and I'm glad that you still spend time on there with me. All right. So I'm gonna try to get as far as I can with my with my gunk and everything in my throat still yet from that cold, but I wanted to keep going because I feel like we're about halfway through here, and I think it's probably worth trying to finish this. So this is chapter 10, A Case History. Saltmarsh House was set pleasantly about 6 miles inland from the coast. It had a good train service to London from 5-mile distant town of South Benham. Giles and Gwenda were shown into a large, airy sitting room with cretonne covers patterned with flowers, a very charming looking old lady with white hair came into the room holding a glass of milk. She nodded to them and sat down near the fireplace. Her eyes rested thoughtfully on Gwenda, and presently she leaned forward, perhaps toward her, and spoke in what was almost a whisper. "Is it your poor child, my dear?" Gwenda looked slightly taken aback. She said doubtfully, "No, no, it isn't." "Oh, I wondered." The old lady nodded her head and sipped her milk. Then she said conversationally, "10:30, that's the time. It's always at 10:30. Most remarkable." She lowered her voice and leaned forward again. "Behind the fireplace," she breathed, "but don't say I told you." At this moment a white uniformed maid came into the room and requested Giles and Gwenda to follow her. They were shown into Dr. Penrose's study, and Dr. Penrose rose to greet them. Dr. Penrose, Gwenda could not help thinking, looked a little mad himself. He looked, for instance, much madder than the nice old lady in the drawing room, but perhaps psychiatrists always looked a little mad. "I had your letter," said Dr. Kennedy's, said Dr. Penrose, "and I've been looking up your father's case history." Mrs. Reed. "I remembered his case quite well, of course, but I wanted to refresh my memory so that I should be in a position to tell you everything you wanted to know. I understand that you have only recently become aware of the facts." Gwenda explained that she had been brought up in New Zealand by her mother's relations, and that all she had known about her father was that he had died in a nursing home in England. Dr. Penrose nodded. "Quite so. Your father's case, Mrs. Reed, presented certain rather peculiar features." "Such as?" Giles asked. "Well, the obsession or delusion was very strong. Major Halliday, though clearly in a very nervous state, was almost emphatic and categorical in his assertion that he had strangled his second wife in a fit of jealous rage. A great many of the usual signs in these cases were absent, and I don't mind telling you frankly, Mrs. Reed, that had it not been for Dr. Kennedy's assurance that Mrs. Halliday was actually alive, I should have been prepared at that time to take your father's assertion at its face value." "You formed the impression that he had actually killed her?" Giles asked. "I said at that time. Later I had cause to revise my opinion, as Major Halliday's character and mental makeup became more familiar to me. Your father, Mrs. Reed, was most definitely not a paranoia type. He had no delusions of persecution, no impulses of violence. He was a gentle, and well-controlled individual. He was neither what the world calls mad, nor was he dangerous to others. But he did have this obstinate fixation about Mrs. Halliday's death, and to account for its origin, I am quite convinced we have to go back a long way to some childish experience. But I admit that all the methods of analysis failed to give us the right clue. Breaking down a patient's resistance to analysis is sometimes a very long business. It may take several years. In your father's case, the time was insufficient." He paused, and then, looking up sharply, said, "You know, I presume that Major Halliday committed suicide." "Oh, no," cried Gwenda. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Reed. I thought you knew that. You are entitled, perhaps, to attach some blame to us on that account. I admit that proper vigilance would have prevented it, but frankly I saw no sign of Major Halliday's being a suicidal type. He showed no tendency to melancholia, no brooding or despondency. He complained of sleeplessness, and my colleague allowed him a certain amount of sleeping tablets. While pretending to take them, he actually kept them until he had accumulated a sufficient amount, and he spread out his hands. Was he so dreadfully unhappy? No, I don't think so. It was more, I should judge, the guilt complex, a desire for a penalty to be exacted. He had insisted, at first, on calling in the police, and then, though persuaded out of that and assured that he had actually committed no crime at all, he obstinately refused to be wholly convinced. Yet it was proved to him over and over again, and he had to admit that he had no recollection of committing the actual act. Dr. Penrose ruffled over the papers in front of him, whose account of the evening in question never varied. He came into the house, he said, and it was dark. The servants were out. He went into the dining room, and as he usually did, poured himself out a drink and drank it, and then went through the connecting door into the drawing room. After that he remembered nothing at all, until he was standing in his bedroom looking down at his wife, who was dead, strangled. He knew he had done it. Giles interrupted. Excuse me, Dr. Penrose, but why did he think he had done it? Well, there was no doubt in his mind. For some months past he had found himself entertaining wild and melodramatic suspicions. He told me, for instance, that he had been convinced that his wife was administering drugs to him. He had, of course, lived in India, and in the practice of wives driving their husbands insane by datura poisoning often comes up there in the native courts. He had suffered fairly often from hallucinations with confusion of time and place. He denied strenuously that he suspected his wife of infidelity, but nevertheless, I think that was the motivating factor. It seems that what actually occurred was that he went into the drawing room, read the note his wife left saying she was leaving him, and that his way of eluding this fact was to prefer to kill her, hence the hallucination. You mean he cared for her very much? Asked Wenda. Obviously, Mrs. Reed, and he never recognized that it was hallucination. He had to acknowledge that it must be, but his inner belief remained unshaken, and the obsession was too strong to yield to reason. If we would have uncovered the underlying childish fixation, Gwenda interrupted. She was uninterested in childish fixations. So, but you're quite sure, you say, that he didn't do it. Oh, if that's what is worrying you, Mrs. Reed, you can put it right out of your head. Kevin Halliday, however jealous he may have been of his wife, was emphatically not a killer. Dr. Penrose coughed and picked up a small, shabby black book. If you would like this, Mrs. Reed, you are the proper person to have it. It contains various jottings set down by your father during the time he was here, when he turned over his effects to his executor, actually a firm of solicitors. Dr. McGuire, who was then the superintendent, retained this as part of the case history. Your father's case, appears in Dr. McGuire's book, only under initials, of course, Mr. K.H. If you would like this diary. Gwenda stretched out her hand eagerly. Thank you, she said. I should like it very much. So, I think I will save this next part for next week because it has, it's about her dad's diary, and it's going to go into that, and I feel like that's maybe a good place to start next week. Um, so we'll do that. And as always, if you guys have questions about anything, please let me know. You can always contact me through Facebook or eBay or whatever. Instagram, I check also. And just go ahead and let me know if you have any questions about books or whatnot or whatever. And also my coming move, which is going to happen here pretty quick. So, alrighty. Thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you next week. Um, hopefully, if God willing, as they say. Um, and we'll talk then. All right. Good night.